Thank you very much for attending tonight. Here from Council is myself, Mayor Colin Hain. To my left, Councillor Mark Swain, Councillor Denise Hain, Councillor Bob Kolkoff. To my right is Councillor Doc Neary, and Councillor John Colson is over there as well. The presentation tonight should take approximately 30 minutes. And with regards to it, we have three individuals here, Mr. Rob Hoffman from Coors Engineering, our CAO, Brad McRae, as well as our Director of Public Works, Fred Spears. One of those moments. So, like I said, thank you very much for coming tonight. In terms of the presentation itself, there's some basic steps that the individuals are going to go through in explaining basically a little bit of history, where we're at, and what the future holds with respect to our process. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll open it up to questions. So in that regard there, if you could hold your questions, make notes of them, and then we'll deal with those at the end in terms of a discussion back and forth. When it comes to the format itself, the questions, you can approach the microphone. There's a microphone here in the aisle with respect to it. You can provide written questions, which we will go through at the end as well. Additional information, emailing, calling, or faxing the district for any additional information, thoughts that may come to mind after this presentation. By all means, provide both input and questions, and we will respond to them. And separate from that, you can always approach any individual from council, either myself or any of the councillors here, or even Councillor Will Geselbach, who unfortunately has not arrived yet. And just as a separate note, Councillor Bob Kolkoff will be leaving partway through the presentation, as he has to attend a presentation with regards to his son tonight. In terms of the council itself, we do have a policy with respect to public engagement that we passed earlier this year. And so the goals and objectives there with regards to access, transparency, engagement, communication, respect, and integrity, that is one of the goals with respect to council, and that is one of the purposes of the meeting tonight. When it comes to the presentation, the first individual that's going to present is Mr. Rob Hoffman. Like I said, he's from Coors Engineering, and he's going to provide us with some background with respect to the system, as well as some additional steps.
Thank you, Mayor Hain. So a brief history of the water system in the Lancel area will follow, and we'll touch on the following topics. Water studies. Is that better? Thank you. So topic one, an overview of the various studies that have been presented and taken on behalf of the Lancel water system over the last 4 years. A summary of the history of the well drilling in the area. A brief description of the emergency water connection the district has with the City of Nanaimo. An outline of the water agreement that the district has with the City of Nanaimo. An update on the capacity of the district's well field and some recent updates in that area, and a listing of the proposed well field improvements, and an update on the review of those district's current water system demands. So this particular slide speaks to the different studies that have been done for various entities over the last 4 years. You can see there's been a number of sort of purveyors that have had an interest, starting with the Regional District of Nanaimo, and then the Lancel Improvement District, and then after incorporation in 2003, the District of Lancel. The studies have reviewed water system supply issues, storage, treatment, distribution aspects, and it kind of sort of follows the trend as the district's evolved from a rural community into something a little bit more urban over the last several years. It's also important to know that the studies don't consistently follow the same topics. As technology improves and the standards of the day evolve, the studies have tried to keep pace. Many of the recommendations of the studies have been acted upon and followed as the district has evolved over time. The studies have reviewed various improvement options within the community, including an assessment of groundwater supply, an investigation of surface water supply, particularly creek intakes, connections to neighboring communities, such as the City of Nanaimo and the Arrowsmith Water Service. Improvements to the storage and distribution have been a constant topic and have been sort of talked upon throughout the district's history and have evolved as standards have changed. Common theme, the district has always been looking for ways to maintain the security and safety of their water supply and to ensure an adequate supply for current and future growth. The well drilling program, a substantial number of wells have been drilled over a period of time, many sort of by developers in different areas of the district. The locations range from the west end of Southwind Drive to the east end of Park Drive. While water has been found at various locations, an adequate supply of water in a centralized location has proved to be a bit elusive. The trick is to find a well or a well field with an adequate supply in a centralized location so that it can be cost effective to maintain, operate, treat, and distribute. Connection to the City of Nanaimo. The district looked towards Nanaimo and requested an emergency connection that could be used on a temporary basis as sort of a fallback position. An emergency connection agreement was developed in 2005, which I understand expires in 2017, which consists of two separate underground flush outs, which are not permanently connected. So in the event of emergency, a physical standpipe with a meter can connect the two items so that water from Nanaimo can flow into the district. This connection is meant to provide limited residential flows. It's not meant to be a permanent flow, and it's not meant to provide sustained or fire flow demands. Nanaimo and Lansdale did sign an agreement in 2014 to allow for water connections with a number of conditions attached. Potential capacity increase in the well field. In 2014, Council authorized a study of the Harvey Road Aquifer and well field and retained a hydrologist, Low-End Hydrology Consulting, to examine the existing operation and look at ways where maybe efficiencies could be improved or utilized. So with field testing and computer modeling, resulted in an assessment that an updated increase to the capacity of the well field could probably be obtained. So the conclusion was that the well field had more capacity than originally thought, and the suggested maximum capacity was estimated to be 2,424 cubic meters a day. But to utilize the supply, the pumping mechanisms in the well, the physical components of the well needed to be improved, which consists basically of replacing well number 6 with a deeper well and rehabilitating wells number 4, 9, and 12, which is standard housekeeping practice for municipal groundwater supplies. Design standards. Council noted that the standards governing the allotment per connection was a little old and could use a fresh look. So a comparison was undertaken to neighboring jurisdictions, and a review of the existing use patterns was conducted. The conclusion was that although there was an opportunity to adjust the current demand standard, more storage and a backup source of water would be prudent to develop and bring online before making any adjustment to the existing standards. So Lansdale's current system. The next few slides kind of speak to the physical and current condition of the district's well operation and the water distribution system, which includes comments on piping and storage, the current connections, the current supply, the water standards, and the water deficit. So I think this is where Fred will speak.
Okay. Currently, the district has 26 kilometers of water pipe, which I think it's 11 kilometers is AC, the rest is all PVC, so we're kind of ahead of the game a little bit on that. The district has 2 reservoirs. The Ware Road Reservoir is constructed of concrete and can hold approximately 408,000 liters. The Alls Road Reservoir is constructed of precast concrete and can hold approximately 263 cubic meters of water. So, in contrast, the Alls Road one is quite small. And the 2 pressure zones, the upper pressure zone and lower pressure zone. Firstly, from the Ware Road Reservoir, water is distributed 2 separate ways, upper pressure zone and lower pressure zone. Not really hearing myself. It's odd that I just don't listen to myself talk. So firstly, the water is released from the reservoir via gravity to the lower pressure zone. This zone is basically anywhere north of the Island Highway. Secondly, water is pumped from the Ware Road Reservoir up to the Alls Road Reservoir. And from there, it is a gravity feed down to the upper zone, which is above the highway. The connection between the 2 pressure zones is the pressure reducing valve. This valve opens up when the pressure drops at the lower zone and allows the water from the upper zone to come in and repressurize the lower zone. In the case of a large fire, that would open and all of the water available to the district would be in the lower zone. The booster pump station and chlorine facility are housed at the Ware Road Reservoir. Basically, the chlorine is injected. It's a hypochlorite solution, which is liquid chlorine, very low doses. The standard, the health department tells us it has to be a traceable amount. Well, we have just a traceable amount, so we keep that quite low. But it's injected in the supply line that supplies from the Harvey Road well field to the reservoir. And with the contact time that the reservoir supplies, it disinfects the water enough according to VHA standards. So. Currently, there's 885 connections that are currently connected, and then there's 7 additional properties that have not built that have paid for the connection when they were available back in the day. It's way before my time, so I guess that's close to 90% of the customers are single residential dwellings, so the other 10% are mixed up between industrial and commercial. The district's Harvey Road well field is located north of Highway 19, and there are 4 main production wells, and they supply water up to the Ware Road Reservoir through a dedicated line. And sneak over here. The district's well field is estimated to able to provide 2,424 cubic meters per day. This was just identified in a report done by Lowen hydrologists last year. So, and we're working our way towards that. And the district has the ability to basically take out right now out of the aquifer about 2,000 cubic meters a day. So there's room for improvement. We're working on that, and hopefully we'll be able to take out the 2424. Current water standards. Currently they're set at 3,400 liters per day per connection. The current standard is conservative. It does result in a numerical deficit, as I believe was previously mentioned by Rob. And currently the standards as they sit right now do limit the ability to extend the system to give out more connections. However, we're looking at ways to adjust those in the future. So, and that'll be talked about in a future slide as well. So, I think that's the limit of my portion of the presentation, which was very short, which I'm thankful for.
Thank you. The next portion we're going to go through is just council initiatives that have been in the direction that's come from council recently with respect to the water system. The first item is amendments that have been requested from the City of Nanaimo in relation to the Lanceville Nanaimo Water Agreement. The first one relates to Snanawas First Nation. The existing water agreement makes no mention about any sort of consideration of either partnership or participation with our neighboring community. And so what council has asked the City of Nanaimo to consider an amendment whereby we acknowledge that we would participate in discussions if they were to occur between the City of Nanaimo and Snanawas with respect to the potential for water supply to the reserve to our west. The second amendment relates to the fact that in the existing agreement, there's 50 new connections a year that are allotted out of the Nanaimo system once we connect. However, the wording identifies that those connections can only go to new development and or new subdivision. And so we're requesting that there be a basic relaxation of that section to allow us to determine whether or not those connections would go to new development or to existing residents in whatever way would be the most efficient way to design our system and to move it forward. The third one relates to some ambiguity in a section related to additional capital costs or future capital costs from the City of Nanaimo. It was identified and later confirmed by legal counsel that the wording as it stood was potentially open to different interpretations, and therefore to ensure that things are in compliance with the community charter and also the provincial regulations, we requested that the wording be amended such that it would remove that ambiguity. Separate from the legal aspect, we've also identified and moved forward through direction to staff on some of the infrastructure aspects that have already been mentioned. So for example, well 6 has been re-drilled. So we've given instructions to re-drill the well, which staff has carried out. In addition, there were 3 wells that we identified, or Coors identified, and staff identified, would benefit potentially from redevelopment of those wells. So later in the year, those 3 wells will be redeveloped with the idea that we can maximize the use out of the existing system to get up to the 2424 number that was previously mentioned by Mr. Hoffman. Additional council initiatives involve the request to review water standards, and Coors prepared a report with respect to water standards as well as provided some recommendations. Coors, through looking at our historical use as well as comparison to other communities, identified the possibility of an adjustment to the water standards. However, at the same time, they identified some infrastructure improvements that needed to occur, that they recommend occur prior to an adjustment of those standards. So at this time, Council has received the report with the direction that we'll reconsider that at the time that those improvements are considered. In addition to that, Council has given direction to staff to develop a water master plan. Staff has prepared a request for proposals that has gone out with the idea of retaining a consultant to carry out and develop the water master plan. There's some additional slides to come up that Mr. Hoffman will cover with regards to the details of what the water master plan will encompass. But in general form, it's basically meant to be a roadmap on the direction and the approach to the actual build-out of our water system. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you. So the next few slides speak to the water master plan that, as mentioned, is currently out for proposal in the market. A water master plan is a key document that will form the guiding principles for an integrated water utility over the next 20-year span. It's a planning document. Say, hey, you have a water system. What would you like to do with it? Where is it going to go, and how are we going to get there? It'll provide guidance on how best to serve the current and future needs of residents, and will focus on items such as upgrading, renewal, and expansion. So the question is, what will the water master plan accomplish? The goal and the idea is to have it provide an outline and a summary of the process undertaken, obtain and summarize comments from the community's feedback, and identify and prioritize deficiencies that will require capital improvements, along which will include cost estimates and staging and scheduling timelines. So what will the master plan accomplish? The hope and the ideal is to identify and prioritize areas for service expansion that aren't currently serviced by District of Lancewood Water, which will include cost estimates for those required works, provide a conceptual plan outlining the nature and scope of the proposed improvements, include options discussing costs and benefits for the proposed improvements, and provide recommendations for the next steps, including graphic representation, guiding policies, and suggestions for extending the life cycle of the system. So the limitations of the master plan. Well, like any kind of community engagement document, there's a needs and wants which can need to be balanced by budget and capacity. It's also worth noting that the information within the report will be affected by the level of engagement with the residents. So the more communication and the greater the detail of the communication, the more feedback that the consultants can put into the report and present to council for consideration. So within the report, or various other reports, there's been the term Class D cost estimate, and the questions come up, well, what is a Class D cost estimate? So given the hierarchy of cost estimates with Class A at the top and Class D at the bottom, Class D is meant to be a high-level estimate with a higher, greater contingency. They're developed without the benefit of preliminary or detailed engineering design. So they're basically your starting point. Someone has an idea of what they want to build, a rough outline of where the works are, but the details haven't been fleshed out to enable everything to be quantified. So Class D is sort of suitable for program planning and to obtain approval in principle by the decision makers to proceed with the investigation and design to enable more detailed information to be gathered. The Class D cost estimate are generally considered to be plus or minus 30%, or pardon me, plus or minus 30 to 40%, depending on the complexity of the project. Class D should include allowances for engineering, design, tendering, construction services, and construction contingencies. The idea is that as further investigation and design work is completed, the accuracy of the estimate and the level of contingency, the accuracy should improve and the contingencies should reduce. So the council motion of April 15, 2016 was that staff should incorporate into the town hall meeting a Class D cost estimation information for providing water to the local cost area based upon the 2015 Coors Water Study and Distribution Report. Clarified what would the cost be without developer contribution. So this particular slide shows an example of a Class D estimate. So basically, given the definition of a Class D estimate and the April 25th, 2016 council motion, assuming the assertion of 124 homes in the northern and southern area, and the understanding below that the numbers are approximate, sort of high-level information, the capital infrastructure costs are in the neighborhood of $3.8 million. So given that number of residents, the cost per resident would break down, using the math, to about $30,000, $30,000.6. You have the connection cost now, which is, I believe, currently outlined in the agreement. That's another almost $6,000. So, given that math, the total approximate cost is about $36,000. It's important to know that that's not just the piping to extend to North and Southland area. It also includes improvements within the existing system to enable that connection to occur. So I think that's the end of this particular presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rob. Tonight's meeting was meant to bring you up to date with respect to some of the actions that have occurred over the roughly past year, as well as what some of the additional steps are going to be taken in the relative short term, and also provide you with an opportunity to ask additional questions for clarification, etc. When it comes to the aspect of the Water Master Plan, for example, a key part of it in terms of the council initiative in relation to it is consultation with the residents, consultation with the existing the residents that are on the existing system, as well as consultation, input, information, data, etc., for those residents that are not on the existing system but would desire to, or in other cases would not like to be part of the system. So the ability, for example, for an area to express their desire that yes, they want to be connected or no, they don't want to be connected, will come out as a result of the development of this Water Master Plan. Tonight's meeting, recognizing it's very easy for some individuals to get down into a great level of detail that may, with all due respect, be of only specific interest to themselves. We don't want to get down to for example, should it be a 6-inch pipe or an 8-inch pipe and that sort of thing. We want to try and keep it at a high level so that people get the best value out of it in terms of what their situation is, for example, in the broad spectrum about the availability of water, and in terms of the steps that need to be done in order to get water to those affected areas and those interested areas. So what we'll do now is maybe take about a 5-minute break. Those people that want questions answered but wish to write them down, if you could write them down, and there's some staff members around who are more than willing to take those questions and we'll work through them. Beyond that, those of you that are comfortable going up to the mic and that, for your questions, so in about 5 minutes we'll start taking those up, if that's all right. Okay? So about 5 minutes, we'll come back, and like I said, hand up the questions if you wish, or if you want to go to the mic, by all means do that as handle. Some of the questions may not be able to identify a response tonight, but certainly we'll get back to you. But in terms of a couple of these questions that are here, I just wanted to kind of address those first because it was common theme, and as well as a question that I got from an individual at the back of the room. By the way, if you have additional questions that you've written down, by all means just wave them around and Mr. McRae will grab them from you and bring them up to the front. There was a question with respect to why the cost estimate for Northwind Southwind was provided as part of the presentation, whether or not this was a presentation specific to Northwind Southwind. That was provided as an example. It was an area where there has been some discussion with respect to it at council, and as well in one of the reports that Coors did mid-last year. It had gone through some of the costing specific to the Northwind Southwind area, but this meeting is not specifically about Northwind Southwind. It includes the consideration of the other areas as well. But by including the Northwind Southwind, it gave us an area where it was already basically defined by part of a study, so we were able to utilize the costing that already existed rather than separately costing another area. So that was just provided as an example itself specifically. The other question, or related to this, is a question related to other areas and consideration of other areas. One of the reasons why Council has approached the City of Nanaimo with regards to amendment to that section about the 50 new connections a year is to provide for areas throughout Landsville when it comes to that need. And by removing that restriction where it says the 50 units can only be used for new development, it would allow for those 50 units to be utilized for existing residents regardless of where they are within the Upper Landsville area. Okay. So maybe we'll go to the mic.
Hi. Oh, no, I'm not on.
No, we have a little loose cable with her.
You want me to take my address first?
As it's not a formal, it's not necessary.
No requirement for an ad.
We'll stand behind
Okay.
you, whatever body you're in.
No, that's right. So I just want to thank council for putting this on in terms of understanding where we're at with our water system. I've been very vocal about needing water, and so one question I have for council is that number of 36,000 is so far out there that even somebody like me who desperately needs water, that's not affordable for me. I have 5 children, I have a mortgage, there's just no way that we can afford 36,000. So how can we bring that number down so that it becomes to an affordable place? I know that the Coors report has it without development involved, and so I'd be curious to know what is an estimate of cost if a developer was involved in bringing water up to the Northwind Southwind area, because we need affordability, and I'm looking to the city of, or district of Landsville, to find a way to make water accessible for your average home. We can't just have water available to people who can afford an outrageous amount of money. And by the way, I've already put $25,000 into my water system, and I have water that is not potable. So if I had started this thing off before putting anything else in, $36,000 guaranteed would have been a good deal.
Okay. With regards to the question on the number of $36,000, recognizing that there are other ways to potentially decrease that cost, one of which is government grants. We have no control over the actual awarding of government grants. We have no control over when those programs come out. And so therefore, we did not include that within that number because it's all theoretical. We have no idea what may be eligible or not eligible until you actually go to apply and the province or the federal government or whatever waves a magic wand and says, here's a check. The development question is another one that we don't directly have control over. With respect to development, it's the decision of a property owner to come forward and apply for development. Now, whatever structure happens to be in place, for example, with development cost charges at the time that that developer comes forward, that could create the potential for contributions. And or if developers come forward with requests, for example, for rezoning or different densities that are within the OCP, there's the potential for some cost sharing, recognizing that they may require water to their development as well. The reason why we didn't incorporate those is you're kind of spin the wheel as to A, will it occur, and B, what the dollar figure is going to be. And so the costing with regards to Coors did not incorporate any sort of amenities or benefits from those areas. And so therefore it effectively gives us, for want of a better term, more or less kind of a worst case scenario. Certainly with regards to, like we're doing with phase 3 of the sewer, we're applying for federal provincial grants with the idea of bringing that down, making it more affordable. When it comes to that, like I said, right now with regards to phase 3, we do not know whether or not it will be granted. And again, the developer side, there are properties, for example, going towards or up Superior, there are properties within other areas of the district where there is the potential for development and therefore the potential for cost sharing. But until those proposals are actually there, we don't know if they will occur and what the value of those would be. Does that answer? Just with respect to other questions that are here, on what basis or priority would new connections be given? Does Northwind, Southwind have priority? Do existing residents have priority over new development? When it comes to, and when does Lower Landsville get priority? So all questions related to kind of the order aspect of things. One of the goals of the Water Master Plan is to identify those areas that have the most critical need and therefore establish those priorities. So when it comes to the aspect of water connections, if we had an unlimited number, it's an easy discussion. When there's any sort of limitation to it, then it does require some sort of evaluation, both in terms of cost, but also in terms of the needs and desires to establish that priority. And so the Water Master Plan will go through and establish from the consultant's aspect, after consultation with the residents, those metrics that we need to make that decision with regards to priority. With regards to whether Northwind, Southwind has priority, Mr. McRae, would you like to comment with respect to the identification within the water agreement?
Sure, okay. So hi, I'm Brad McRae. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer, in case nobody has seen me yet. In respect to the section of the agreement, when I've reviewed it and with council, the legal agreement between Nanaimo and Landsville does not specifically state anywhere the Winds or Northwind, Southwind. The Winds is a nickname, if you will, a place where the municipality knows what that is, but from a legal standpoint, it doesn't technically exist. So the agreement refers to water of Upper Landsville and Lower Landsville. It does not refer to a specific subdivision.
And then just related to that, the mention of Lower Landsville, part of that question is also when does Lower Landsville get priority? Within the Landsville and Nanaimo water agreement, there is not provision for water to be supplied to Lower Landsville from the Nanaimo system. And so therefore, when there's consideration of the improvements, for example, to the water that we're getting out of the well field, that potentially will create the availability of connections for the Lower Landsville area.
Barry French, 7916 Southwind Drive. I'd just like to just make a general statement that I'm not sure if I'm even part of Landsville. I've lived in Landsville since 1990. Initially, the Aerosmith watershed referendum, it was defeated. It had to do with big development. Landsville wasn't incorporated at the time. And I totally understand why it was defeated at that time, although I was vehemently for that watershed. If you don't have water, you don't have anything. And I was part of the group of the Water for Winds. We went around, surveyed the people if they were interested in getting the costs and everything. And I'm deeply disturbed that you would just throw out a $36,000 number like that is just going to automatically scare off everyone in sight. Like, my lady to the right here said, we can't afford that. This is a serious health and safety issue. I can't believe, well, I'm sure there are grants available to deal with the issues because they are coming out of the woodwork constantly. And I would like to believe that I am a part of this community, and we need water sooner than later. We don't disagree that Blackjack area and all around those other areas, that it needs to be surveyed. My question would be, when is this going to take place? The council said that they were going to do a survey of this area. How does that fit in the time frame to get this going?
Okay, I'll refer it to the planner with respect to the water master plan timing.
In terms of timing, the project is set to commence. When I say commence, we'd be looking to award the contract to the consultant July of this year, with the hopes of completing the entire works by the end of March next year, 2017. And so with respect to the survey for the various neighborhoods, that's one of that'll take place at the early stages of the program.
I see. Let me gather my thoughts for a moment here. As you can see, I am deeply concerned about this. I have serious water issues with my well. I know the issue that, regarding fire flows in the district. Lanceville, whether we have hydrants in the area, having been a past firefighter, how long it would take to get set up if you ever had to fight a fire in that area. There are so many factors, and it has been such an extended period of time that this has not been dealt with. I am very pessimistic that we're not looking at another 10, 15 years at minimum on top of that, if at all.
Okay.
Are there any other, one second, are there any other scenarios other than this 36,000 that can be put out there of best case scenarios?
Are you speaking with regards to cost, or are you speaking
With
regards
regard to costs.
Okay. As I said, the way to reduce the cost is consideration of grant programs and or development.
Exactly, and I've heard a lot of comments from people that they don't want their taxes raised. With no development, how do you not think your taxes are going to raise because as costs go up? So what are people afraid of about development? If it is managed properly and looked after in a structured way, it could be a good thing for this community. Our youth and everything else are looking to live in Lanceville and be here, but there is nothing for them. Development is not necessarily a bad thing.
Okay. With respect to the development side and the developer side, there is the OCP in place, a developer coming forward who identifies where possibly the use identified in the OCP does not meet either with community desires for diverse housing and other options for housing, or doesn't match up with maybe what the developer would like to do with a piece of property. A developer is more than welcome to come to the district and apply for rezoning, changing OCP designation or otherwise. But that in itself is up to the developer.
This has not occurred yet?
With respect to that, I'll turn that over to Frank.
We do have an application for rezoning on Superior Road at the moment. That application just came in, I guess about 3 weeks ago, officially. And so we're in the process of reviewing the various studies they have to complete, and we're in discussions with the applicant at the moment.
Which is also another issue about this. I get it, the 36,600. Ideally, that's what you have right now. But to throw this number out here without any other possibilities, what it also could be, I have a difficult time with that because no one in their right mind can afford this.
Well, the challenge is what possibility to bring in. So we've said that there is theoretically a possibility of grants and a possibility of development in that respect to assist with those costs. With regards to that number up there, think through scenarios. If there was no number up there, you'd be at the microphone saying, where's a number? If I say to you, for example, 20,000 cheaper because of a development, and that's just a theoretical number, it's not based on any calculation. You go, where'd that number come from? Sounds good, but because we as a council or as a district have no control over that number and when it will occur, it would be equally misleading. So what that number is a factual number based on engineering calculations as well as tied in with the agreement with the NIMO. And so as I mentioned earlier, a worst case scenario.
Just as a last aside, I hear you say talking about stage 3 sewer development. I would argue that getting people the water that is needed is far more important at this stage of the game than doing the stage 3 sewer development.
With the phase 3 sewer development, what's occurred there is we've applied for a grant for phase 3 sewer. And so in that regard, which fits in with the sewer plan itself. The information to be able to meet the deadlines for that grant program, there isn't the information at hand to be able to apply for a grant at this time with regards to water. We have to provide the justification through the water master plan in order to go to the province.
We have had an official community plan for years and the water development is being in it. Why do we need a water master plan now to turn around and tell us the same stuff that we already know?
Because, and if we could turn to somebody else next, but I'll answer
Yes,
that. With respect to the application for grants, it's not based on do you have an official community plan. The grants are based on needs. And so, for example, throughout the province, there are communities that have been on boil water orders for years. And so whole communities, not individual households, whole communities. So when it comes to the aspect of determining need, the province, recognizing their limited bucket of money, needs to assess that. And so what we need to do is provide the background to provide the best case possible in order to be successful in the application for grants.
All I can say is I can't wait another 25 more years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. French. Just another aspect when it comes to the written questions. When it comes to, for example, the $36,000, how payable, equal payments over what period, that in itself is determined at the time of the application or the creation of the local service area. Historically, it has not been unusual for those sorts of payments to be spread over a 20-year period. In addition to that, what percentage of residents are required for approval to proceed in a local service area? Staff may correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's greater than 50% of the individuals representing greater than 50% of the assessed value. Okay, so it's basically a greater than 50% rule. Back to the microphone.
I always hate to ask my question because it's in the same vein, but I've lived on North End for 15 years and intend to stay there as long as I'm able. I've always considered myself an integral part of Lassville, I guess because I had a business here and worked here until I retired. And I would hate to see us ever disintegrate into them versus us. I think of all of us. I always have. I don't think, oh, well, why are they getting this over there and we're not getting that? Having said that, we wouldn't be able to live in our houses if there was no water. And I haven't had my water tested for all of the elements, but as far as I know, I don't have a problem. I do know, because I used to sell homes, how many homes have very low flow, like even half a gallon a minute or less, yet they seem to limp along because they have a water tank. I guess my question is a little different. I understand that the $36,000 could very well change to do with development or grants, but my question is a little different. When the first phase of sewer came in, which I believe was on Dickinson Road, I had a lot of clients who only had to pay from that line to their home, which is something that everyone would be willing to do. I take it that's probably the $6,000 price. And I don't know if the 100% cost of that sewer line running down all the different roads, let's say Dickinson to start, was covered by grants, or was some of it covered by our taxes. I guess that's where I hear grumbling from neighbors, is people say, well, if they're going to re-drill or improve well 6, aren't we all paying for that in our taxes? So what portion of us needing water would be paid by everybody?
Okay. First off, I'll deal with the sewer aspect first. With regards to Phase 1 and Phase 2 of sewer, they are local service areas. And so as an example, when Phase 1 was implemented, whatever cost came after the grants was funded by those residents within that local service area, not by each of the individual property owners. Not only did they pay for the section of pipe that was on their property, but they also paid a portion of the pipe that was in front of their house and the related pump stations and that sort of thing. So a resident who was not part of sewer Phase 1 did not have to pay any of that capital cost or ongoing cost. When it comes to the aspect of their overall cost, both Phase 1 and Phase 2 received a 2/3 federal provincial grant. So effectively, those individuals paid 1/3 of the actual construction cost for those areas. When it comes to the improvements to the wells, as was mentioned by Robert Fred, some of the items such as redevelopment of the existing wells is part of the regular maintenance. It's not something that happens every year, but is part of the regular maintenance cycle of wells. And so as the pumping capacity decreased compared to where it originally was, it was deemed that this should be the time that we should reevaluate that and redevelop those to try and bring them back up to their original pumping standards. Similar situation with the redrilling of well 6. The original amount, original capacity of the well field, to put it in simple terms, was up here, but over time and a bit of degradation, the pumping capacity had dropped down to here, despite the fact that the same number of users were still connected to it. And so by moving it back up to its original pumping capacity, it establishes and creates that safety factor for those existing residents themselves. So that's where the benefit comes for an existing resident. If by chance, and there's some theories that have been put out by Lowen Hydrology in consultation with Coors Engineering, that there is a possibility that there may be some additional pumping capacity over and above the original rated level of the well field, then that creates the opportunity for potential new connections. So it's an incremental thing. Stabilize the supply that you have now, and then look for whether or not there's some additional in there.
I'm sure everyone understands and believes that should be done. I guess my only question was, is that not borne by all taxpayers? So I guess we're wondering if some of our costs wouldn't also be borne by all the taxpayers.
When you say some of your costs up in the Winds area, for example, if there are improvements that benefit the overall system, the general approach has been that this would be borne by the overall system. So as an example, that redevelopment of well 6, there's a security aspect for the existing well users, so therefore they contribute to it. When the people like the Winds connect, and there's a benefit to them, that cost or part of that cost will be encompassed within that local area service.
It's just a common question.
Yeah, fair enough. Yes, sir.
Jack Whitaker, 6796 Normal Drive. Is it on?
I think it's off.
I'm sure you got a voice.
Yeah, you got here. 6796 Normal Drive. I've lived on Normal Drive for about 21 years. We're on 5 acres, and we're very fortunate we have ample water. And we are a developer, our company, but we don't intend to develop here. Not that we are negative to landscape, but $36,000 figure is not affordable to the, I said no. Is it on now? $36,000 figure is not affordable to the average person. I'm sure I realize how they got to that figure, the density, the geography, and whatnot would be the figure here. You need, if you want to bring that figure down, you're going to need density. And I'm not sure the majority of people here would want density. I don't, but maybe I'm a little different. I want my 5 acres. But when you bring the water in, you've got to remember you're bringing sewer in. So you've got to bring the sewer in with the water at the same time if you want to do it economically. And one other thing I would like to throw out, and I've always argued this many years. I think we've done away with the septic tanks prematurely in this country. If we took our septic tanks and took our field, directly from our septic tank to the sanitary sewer line, you would have pretty clear water going out there. You wouldn't have solids going out to the ocean or anything else. There might be something to look at. I know some of the engineers will argue with me, but it might be something to look at if we decide to go with sewage instead of going to these large treatment plants and so on. Because I think it is feasible. And if you've got a good septic tank, then I can tell you, I had never pumped my septic tank in 21 years. Everybody said, well, that's not possible. Well, sure the hell is. I've never pumped it, and I've got a good field. But if I had a field, if I was dumping into a sewer line, it'd be the same thing as a real 100% effective field, and you wouldn't have a problem. You would have no solids going to the ocean. You'd have basically treated water. And you got to look at density if you want affordable water and sewer. Thank you.
Just with respect to the density question, there is the OCP in place. If a developer comes forward and wishes to do a density greater than what currently exists within the OCP, there is a separate public process in that regard, including public hearings and public information meetings. So people would get fully notified as to what the development is, what the proposal is, what amenities may come with it or not come with it in that respect. So people will be fully informed about what the possible options are, and so therefore they can weigh some considerations of, for example, if a developer is going to run a supply pipe, say up Superior, just as an example, that's going to decrease the cost of a resident in the Winds, they'll be fully aware of that. So they can weigh the aspects of increased density with the consideration of the benefit that may come from it. And that would apply to other areas as well. So for example, Blackjack and Alger area, there is some developable land, for example, between our reservoirs and that area there, so that as well could be a consideration for those residents.
But you do need a large parcel of land to be able to afford the sewer and the water to bring it into this district.
Well,
I don't think we have it. You have the foothills development, it's not kind of backwards, but
yeah, and I mean, in terms of, for example, the G property, 60 acres, roughly. The G property going up Superior.
Right-hand side of Superior.
Yeah, and in terms of the proposal, and the proposal has not come to council, but Frank will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe with regards to sewer, the intent is to connect up. And when it connects up, it ties into the regional district treatment plant over the Greater Nanaimo Pollution Control Center on Hammond Bay Road. So it's not a case of pushing solids out into the ocean. They're dealt with at the Pollution Control Center.
But how far would they have to take sewer from there to hook up to your existing sewer line to go to that treatment plant today?
Mr. Lumshu, would you like to field that? Just approximate.
Almost a kilometer. If you're going down Superior Road and then down to Lancel Road, it's probably about 1.3 kilometers. If you go directly down Harvey Road West and then cross under the highway, it's probably about less than 1 kilometer.
The sewer lines on Harvey and on Lancel Road down there?
Yeah, there's already existing sewer lines.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of some written questions here, how many are not connected? I can give you ballpark numbers. Currently, there's 885 connections to the existing system. There's another 7 connections that are bought and paid for many years ago. In terms of the number of people not connected, ballpark be 400 or 500 properties approximately. In terms of new wells that have been drilled and rejected, what was the gallons per minute? Off the top of my head, I wouldn't know the well stats on the various ones, recognizing they occurred over many years. However, in terms of the acceptance of wells, there's been a general guideline of approximately 50 gallons a minute. dependent upon location, recognizing that if a well is a far distance from the existing reservoirs, et cetera, the cost to connect or to run that water and get it into the reservoirs so it can be treated would outweigh the benefits in that regard on an ongoing basis and an operational basis. And the last one on the same page is the goal of council to provide eventually water to all households who wish it. When it comes to the consideration of council, certainly there's been expressed by all council members that the goal is to provide water to all residents who require it or desire it, but do recognize that it's a plan that needs an implementation map effectively to get to the various areas, including consideration of possibilities of development and availability of grants.
Hi, Sandy Stevens. I live up on the Winds. I moved here 5 years ago, and I have to say I love Lanceville, and I have never lived anywhere I like better. And I also want to commend the fire department because they do a tremendous job, and they get out there and they are ready to help you whenever you need it. But I feel a certain vulnerability because we don't have the hydrants. What about the concept of at least putting the hydrants up into the Winds, and then people are a little safer, a little more comfortable, a little more confident, and we know that we have less risk and less worry, and that's probably considerably more affordable, and then people can choose to connect or not connect, but the outlay of cash would be a lot lower.
Mr. Spears?
When talking about putting hydrants and stuff up on Northwind and Southwind, I think it's kind of misleading when people think that it's cheaper. The biggest cost of actually supplying water up in the Northwind, Southwind area has to do with fire flows. You have to increase size of tanks, you have to increase size of water lines. The domestic use is very low. That domestic use is the cheaper portion of the actual infrastructure that would go in up there. So in a sense, in order to get fire flows, you would need a 10-inch line going up there. You could actually feed the domestic usage up there probably with a 4-inch line at the end of the day. But you have to size the lines in order to meet fire flow regulations. So that's basically the major cost of it as well. Once you're putting in domestic lines, and you have to look at the fire flows as well.
So are you considering in this $36,000 estimate putting in fire hydrants, or is this just water?
That Class D estimate would include the fire hydrants along the roads as well.
Okay, well, I guess I have to say I'm for it because I really want a fire hydrant nearby.
Fair enough. Another question, what is the daily maximum limit of water used for local businesses and industrial sites? How much is used? How much capital revenue will be contributed by these businesses?
I don't think any of us have that information on hand right now, so I think that's something that we could look at and get back to the author of the question.
Sir.
Gordon May. Earlier in the presentation, someone said something about an adjustment of water standards. I don't know what that even means, as I don't know what it means, and what would the implication of adjusting water standards have to do with availability of water? Do you understand the question?
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Hoffman?
So currently the district has a standard of 3,400 liters per connection per day. So what that means is they look at the rated capacity of the aquifer divided by the flow per connection, and that gives you a theoretical number of connections. That 3,400 liters per connection per day is sort of a holdover, carryover from the more rural days when developers would subdivide land and be responsible to provide water to service their development, and it roughly equates to about half gallon a minute per lot. So That number has been carried over as the district became an improvement district and as it became a municipal entity. So our task a few months ago was to take a look at that number and sort of current context as the district is a municipality and it's running a centralized system and compare it to neighboring jurisdictions. So looking at, what's actually used during heavy use days and what's the safe allowance to provide enough factor of safety so that if you have a heavy use day and a fire, how much water do you want to have in the system to meet all your demands? So we took a look at the standards from other neighboring jurisdictions and looked at a number of 2,900 liters per connection per day, which is a little less than the 3,400 liters per connection. So that's what we meant by the adjustment. But our recommendation was before council considered lowering their standard was to invest in some other infrastructure improvements such as a larger reservoir in the upper zone to provide more fire flows to provide that buffering if you get the event of a heavy fire on a heavy demand use day. So did that answer your question? Probably. It's kind of complicated. There's many pieces to it.
Does that mean we're if you adjust them, these standards will be in better shape than we thought we were, or worse shape?
If you lower the demand per connection after doing all these infrastructure improvements, you'll be in a better position, but it's still, pardon me?
That's good news.
Yes.
Maybe I can just add the fact that the standards are currently 2,400 liters per connection per day. That's basically a planning tool. And it takes into account all the safety factors that Rob was mentioning. So it's more of a planning tool with safety factors in it for planning out a future system. And if we lower that number, we have to make sure we have the water available to supply it.
Some more written questions. Will taxes increase with expansion? As I mentioned earlier, the idea of local area service is the people, the individuals that are part of or benefiting from that local area service will be the individuals that are paying for those capital costs that are in relation to that. Part of the ongoing aspect is the operation of the system and the maintenance of the system. So it's a bigger system, so therefore maintenance costs will go up, and now you have more people contributing to it. In addition to that, there'll be some efficiencies realized, recognizing that now there are some costs that would be then spread out over more users. So how it would end up turning out is, again, part of the costing, and that will come out as a result of the water master plan. So there's no definitive answer on that as to whether or not the taxes will increase with expansion, or decrease for that matter. One note with respect to the Nanaimo water agreement, there is a clause in there that speaks that our rates cannot be lower than the city of Nanaimo rates. So to a certain extent, there's also a contractual requirement due to the agreement itself. Blackjack and Alger and Clark, as mentioned previously, the Class D estimate that was provided for the Winds area was used as an example. The goal, again, of the amendments is to allow council to allocate connections to areas of Upper Lansville, including Blackjack, Alger, and Clark. And then with regards to the cost of connections, if I can just kind of clarify a little bit more, as Mr. Hoffman pointed out, those cost estimates themselves were Class D estimates, and what that basically says is plus or minus 30 to 40%. So it may come down just as a result of that 30 to 40% potential difference. In theory, I guess it could go up depending on site characteristics and those sorts of aspects when more detailed planning gets done. But then in that regard there, if we head down that road, we would get a closer estimate before it becomes a local area service, or there's a proposal for a local area service.
So that kind of took away some of my first question, which was, everybody kept saying, that's okay, 36,000 was the estimate, and I thought I heard somebody say that it could be 40% higher or lower. And in my experience dealing with municipal issues, working at a particular bridge in Victoria, it's rare that anything will actually come in under. So let's talk about what it is. So let's say it's 50,000-ish per household to get water in a municipality that has arsenic and boron in a lot of the wells. So I think as a group, nobody here wants to continue as we are. So Mayor and staff and council, how can we pull this together? If we go to the province requesting a grant where maybe 5% of residents can fork out 50 grand for water versus just invest in a lot of other ways to get water through their well and so forth. Does the fact that we have tainted water in a lot of the wells that people are accessing with no other option, does that increase our chances of getting a grant? How do we pitch our efforts together politically to go as one instead of against each other to the province to try and the federal government to try to get a significant grant? Because if we don't, then it's 50 grand, and why are we all here wasting our time? Because nobody is going to spend $50,000 to hook up. Thanks.
The first step isn't political. The first step is getting that background so that when you make the grant application, you've got the engineering and the scientific and the historical background to make the case to the province. Certainly when it comes to lobbying your MLA and that sort of an aspect, certainly the squeaky wheel tends to get more grease. Can I say that? When it comes to, as a comparison, there are areas in Cedar where they don't really have any wells. So there's houses, but the water supply there is just effectively non-existent. So then it becomes a question of degree. And so as an example, and it was a great initiative on the part of the residents within Northwind, Southwind to begin compiling that information as to the desire for water and the need for water. And those aren't necessarily the same thing, because when it comes to the aspect of things like quality and quantity, I think a lot of people would say that's a need. You know, it's a basic right. When you get into the arguments about fire safety and fire hydrants, your arguments lessen a bit. There are a lot of areas within the province that do not have fire hydrants. And so from the provincial standpoint of approving grants, for them to authorize grants based on that argument, they're opening up the door effectively to every other community. So what the community here needs to do and the different areas need to do is to compile that data, incorporate it into the plan that we can then go to the province and say, we've done our research, we require a grant to address this challenge. It's what we did with the sewer grants. And when it came to the first phase and the second phase of the sewer grants, there was an individual down in Victoria that was very familiar with our system, and he became our advocate for the improvements to the system to address the problems with regards to coliform counts and that sort of thing in the ditches. It's the same process that we need to go with in this respect here. Emotions are part of it, and I fully respect that. But when it comes to the ability to lobby the governments, you need to be able to make your case not just on an emotional basis, but also on that scientific and engineering basis. And that's the goal of the Water Master Plan, is to provide that background, provide that format, so when we go in front of a provincial minister, for example, we can say, we've done our research, we have the data, we have the facts, this is why we need it. And it just makes a lot better argument, more cohesive, so when they go to decide person A or Group A or Group B, it's a lot easier to go with the group that's well researched and can provide that information.
My question is, does Lanceville actually have an agreement with the city of Nanaimo? Have they agreed to give water?
Yes, they've agreed to give water within the confines of the water agreement that was signed in September of 2014. And so if I might go a little bit further on that. As I mentioned earlier, Council has proposed to the City of Nanaimo that there be amendments to the agreement. Okay, and I detailed those earlier as to the reasoning and rationale for those. Regardless of what City of Nanaimo Council says, there is an agreement in place. And the request for amendments to the agreement does not in any way, shape, or form nullify the legality of that agreement. And so it does not, the request does not put that agreement at risk in any way, shape, or form. What it does do is it allows, when it comes to, for example, for connections for existing residents, it allows us to fulfill what the original goal and objective of going to the City of Nanaimo was, and that was water for existing residents. It allows us to plan our system in a way that's efficient and effective, as opposed to being driven by a clause that says new development only. So yes, the agreement is in place, and the requests do not in any way, shape, or form nullify it, regardless of what City of Nanaimo Council says.
All right, so that being the case, to make an actual connection, if more connections are needed, I understand there are some in place already, but if more connections are needed from the City of Nanaimo to give this supply to Lanceville, that cost must be reasonably minimal compared to these numbers. We're talking of millions of dollars to service these large areas.
There's a requirement or an idea, plan, let's use the word plan. In terms of infrastructure, there'd be a requirement to build a pipe and in order to connect to our system. The estimated cost of that is approximately $800,000. There's a separate item, which is a payment of a lump sum to the City of Nanaimo in order to connect the system itself and provide Nanaimo water to the existing people within the Winchelsea area. The cost on that is approximately $1.2 million. So those costs alone are roughly, round figures, about $2 million.
So, like, my point then that I'd like to make is, if the water is available and there are people, and if the distribution of it is now going to be equalized throughout Lanceville, those persons like myself have been waiting quite a while for water too, and we have property that could be developed. I have paid for all of the infrastructure already. Several years ago, it's in place. The water runs past my property. The connections are to my properties. I just can't turn them on. So wouldn't it not make good sense to pay to have these properties serviced? We all realize if we're going to create some funding here, you have to create some more density and to get your tax base up. And even starting with lesser amounts, for example, we could use 10 or 12 connections if we could be allowed to develop the properties that I'm involved in. Well, if time you pay the DCCs and the fees, etc., and then create a much larger tax base of 10 or 12 properties instead of paying taxes on one property, wouldn't this be a start of getting, funding in place and let it perhaps grow from there? I don't think to try to bite off this whole chunk of many, many millions of dollars sounds like it's virtually impossible. And for people to pay $36,000. But if it could be worked on and perhaps some money generated from a variety of sources, such as myself, and I know there's many others, wouldn't that be a start in getting this done?
To add a little bit of a complication to your personal situation, you're in the lower pressure zone, and so with respect to the Nanaimo water, as the agreement reads, it could not go to the lower pressure zone. And so that $2 million connection would not automatically create new connections within the lower pressure zone. Now, the redrilling of well 6 and the redevelopment of the other 3 wells, as well as the infrastructure improvements proposed by Coors Engineering, we're looking at the aspect of increasing the capacity of the lower zone. So those steps there are what provide the potential for the lower zone as the agreement sits right now. Just another written question here. Could cisterns and rainwater salvage be incorporated into the plan? And could residents who have good wells and don't want or need city connections pump water into the system to supplement, and they could receive rebates for water contributed?
Although that is a really good idea, VHA would frown upon that. They consider potable water to be drawn from a single source and not multiple sources of such nature. We have a really tough time of getting permits to construct within the water system just as a district ourselves, and getting a new permit on the new well 6. There's a list of conditions that go along with that are as long as my arm, which obviously my arms are not very long, but it does make it more complicated. The health authority would not allow that to happen, in a short answer. So.
Could any staff comment on cisterns and rainwater salvage?
Certainly, there are communities that have implemented certain bylaws and guidelines with respect to using cisterns to augment water sources, but typically they're used for gardening and so forth. Now, other countries that are drought-ridden, they've taken that step where the rainwater is really their drinking water supply. But here, we haven't gone there at this point in time.
Hilda Higgs, and I'm currently on the community water on Dickinson. And some 20 years ago, I was approved for second hookup, and at that time wanted to put my mother in a small place, and then it wouldn't perk. So I said I needed it at a later date, didn't take it then, never dreamt that the community wouldn't be able to supply water to anyone needing it. And so I feel that if there are more hookups, that I should be first on the list if these current wells can accommodate more hookups. At this time, I'm hoping to, put the kids on to help with the, that's my goal, is to split it so the kids could come on the property and help with the work. And I always thought that when we got the sewer, that water was coming with it. And I agree with this gentleman back here. My septic field worked wonderful. Never had a problem. Never had to have it pumped. Had it looked at once. Didn't need it. And that was a waste of money to me if water didn't come with it. And that's a long time now that we've had the sewer. It's been 16 years now since I requested the second water hookup because I had new perking systems. And I also feel that this meeting sort of pits Upper Landsville against Lower Landsville. The people in the Winds need it. It's wrong. Everyone in Landsville that needs water should be able to have it, and the council should be supplying water to everyone that needs it before big development. Thank you.
Okay. And when it comes to, just to kind of reiterate, one of the reasons why we've gone back to the city of Nanaimo is to provide that flexibility in the agreement so that it doesn't become an issue of neighborhood against neighborhood. When it comes to the consideration of Landsville residents as a whole, the goal of council is to supply water to the Landsville, or make it available to the residents as a whole, with existing users being the prime focus. Do keep in mind, as some of the individuals have expressed from the Winds area, in some cases the way to get the cost down is some consideration of development, and so that's something that would be looked at. When it comes to priority, there is an existing policy in place, guessing a date, 2006, 2007 roughly, that Council of the Day put into place, where it was, for want of a better way to say it, it was first come, first served. Now at that time there, it was not identified that there would be the challenge of the planning revolving around, for example, a limitation in terms of the number of connections if we were connected to Nanaimo. And so therefore, from that standpoint, the policy also had in there that there needed to be an identification of that additional supply before that policy effectively kicked in. My expectation is, as part of the Water Master Plan, that policy would be reviewed in relation to the priorities identified within that plan.
My name is Louise Scott, and I live on Harley Drive, and I haven't been able to have potable water for the last 15 years. My question is, because I've been a resident in this community for 43 years, and I'm still without potable water, if all of this can come together, we can get our costs in line, we can get some grants, and if we have to, development. How soon after the master plan is created are we going to have pipes in the ground and the availability to connect? Is it going to be another 40 years? Or is it going to be in the next 3 to 5 in my lifetime? I'd like to know that. Thank
you. Maybe if staff could give us an idea approximately with regards to the timing of infrastructure works once the plan's in place with the recommendations and accepted by council.
So nobody wants to touch that one.
It's a great question. It's one that just cannot be answered off the cuff. Microphone. If I could talk loud enough, basically, I don't think anybody here can actually answer that question. There's too many variables. If we look at how long the master plan will take, well, we're looking at running into next year before that's completed. And then if we're going to apply for grant funding or other sources of funding of some nature, we're probably looking at another timeline. And then there's design and build all the infrastructure. So there's too many variables to actually give you a number. If I actually set a number to you, I'd be lying. It's the same question that comes all the time with the sewer. What's the sewer company based on grant funding and all the rest? And we don't know. If we're looking at funding, we're not going to be able to tell anybody. If we're looking at funding and grants, we're not going to be able to tell people that we'll have it in the next 5 years. If the only way this will go through is through funding others, like grant funding and developers, we can't comment on when that's going to happen because we don't know.
And one other factor to remember is that with the local service area model, it's also dependent upon your neighbors. So, for example, if you live in an area of 50 homes and 26 of them vote against it, there's no way for the cost of that system to be recovered in order to actually put it in there. So adding to the provincial questions and those sorts of things, there's also the individual area aspect. And so, again, the Water Master Plan, go through, get the costing, then the neighborhood or the area will become better informed, and therefore it's easier to understand, for example, within that area, which direction your neighbors would go in that sort of a question. And there was, when we did Sewer Phase 1, there were individuals within Sewer Phase 1 who said, I can't afford it as individuals, but collectively within the neighborhood, greater than 50%, voted for it. So we went ahead with it, and therefore those people connected. Another written question here, what if Nanaimo does not agree to the proposed amendments? As I've stated, there is a legally binding agreement in place. It has challenges, no doubt about it. If Nanaimo does not agree to the direction, of, for example, of those 50 connections to existing residents as opposed to new development, it does not end our planning with respect to the existing residents. Does it change it? Most definitely it does. How the infrastructure is going to be configured, where that water is going to come from potentially for those people becomes a much greater challenge. But it does not remove the possibility. When it comes to the infrastructure itself, for example, the Nanaimo Water Agreement requires basically a separation of Lanceville water versus Nanaimo water. And so therefore there would have to be a different configuration of our system, which would have some potential costs associated with it in order to implement it. Okay, so the simple aspect is they make the changes, then it's very easy for us to go through in terms of the process. If they don't, then it changes the process.
I have a question for the gentleman who's involved in the CORS report. When you survey our neighborhoods for water quality, and particularly water quality is my concern. So I have boron in my water. On my street, I know of 7 homes that have boron in the water. One of my lovely neighbors has said that she actually hasn't tested her well for her water. So when you survey water quality, are you going to be taking samples from everybody's water things so that we have an accurate report of people's water quality, or is it going to be just on their understanding? Because I've had neighbors tell me that they don't want to test their water because if it comes up with boron in it, then that drops their property value because they have to disclose it. And so what I'm concerned about when we talk about water quality is that people won't either know they have it, because I know of a certain person in this room who found out recently that he has boron in his water, that we don't always know what's in our water. So that's my one, I'll ask you to clarify how you're going to survey the things. And the other part is just that when I emailed the Ministry of Health, they told me that this is a known problem in your area, boron. It is documented by the provincial government that boron is a problem in our area. And it follows the coal seams. Lanceville is a coal mining community. This is not a north wind, south wind issue. This is a Lanceville issue. How are we going to accurately survey what our quality of water is?
Okay, first of all, just for clarification, Coors Engineering and Mr. Hoffman are not, I'm not going to say not necessarily, but we've put out a request for proposals, so it's not necessarily somebody like Coors Engineering that would be doing that plan. Okay, just want to relate that. I don't know if staff wants to comment with regards to a survey method at this time, but I do know that we can't force the testing on a private landowner.
But if we don't have an accurate survey of what our problem is in our area, how do we get grants saying we have a health problem in our area? Because then you're just relying on people like me who's willing to have my property value drop in order to say, we have a problem. Because otherwise, we have people who aren't testing and don't know. And honestly, and this is from, I think on a district end, I have to question what is your responsibility to make sure that when there's a known problem in our area, that residents know to test for the known problem, because boron is not on your standard test. Arsenic is one that most people recognize because you hear arsenic in your well, but you don't hear about boron in your well. And I want to make sure that we are actually getting a clear picture of what's in our wells for grants.
Yeah, as I said, we can't force testing on individuals. So when it comes to the public engagement and the creation of that water master plan and having people where they're willing to have their water tested, and B, make that public. I'm not going to say public because the survey method itself hasn't been decided yet, but for them to express their needs based on the most accurate information that they have is hugely important. And so, for example, when you guys went around and spoke to the people around your neighborhood, part of the aspect of that would have been education of those individuals, because some people live in a bubble.
It's true, but wouldn't that be the district's responsibility, not the individuals?
I'm not saying that the expectation is that you guys will go out and educate.
Individuals' responsibility to test our water, but you've got a health concern that people don't know they should be watching for.
And like I said, that's where the education comes from. And so when it comes to the creation of the water master plan, part of it will be the education of the different areas and the community in order that we get the most valid information possible in order to create that water master plan.
Why has it taken years then? Sorry, I'm going to sit down now.
I don't know if staff wants to add anything?
Your Worship, we're just talking about the discussion of what provincial responsibility is versus municipal responsibility. Provincial responsibility in discussing about they set the levels, they set the regulations, they set the zoning, they change things, and so that's
louder.
Kind of discussing.
We can't hear you.
I'll try this again. Basically, from a standpoint, the provincial government sets the regulations on water. That's where BHA comes from. They decide what's an acceptable level of boron, what's an acceptable level of arsenic, et cetera, et cetera. The recent municipality I just came from, Lillooet, had incredible issues with arsenic. And every year, the authority would come in and change the levels and say, this is unacceptable, this is unacceptable. So that's where we get the regulatory body that comes into play.
They're not telling you.
Yes.
Yeah, the comment was, which was up here, Council, is that what Mr. McCrae was speaking to is in relation to municipal systems. When it comes to the responsibility of an individual's water supply, it falls to the individual.
Derek, I'm from the Winds area. I was part of the committee that petitioned the neighborhood to express our need for cost estimates that we've never been able to get till I see it in your brochure here tonight of $30,000, which is not feasible for most of us, as you know. We have done our own spreadsheet. I brought it with me here tonight for anybody who wants to look at it, and it's sort of a better idea of what it costs could look like when we enter into things like government grants, developer assistance, fire cost insurance savings when we have our fire hydrants. So that being the worst case scenario, the best case scenario is $4,000 or $65 a year over 20 years. So those costs are quite variable. I have it on a spreadsheet here. We worked it all through. Again, these cost D estimates, plus or minus, apparently governments never come in under, so it could be considerably more when it gets down to the nitty-gritty. Our water usage would be very low in peak summer periods, as most of us would utilize our wells for irrigation. Here, these 3,400 liters per day, but I can guarantee you when we have our wells, we won't be using that. We'll be using our wells. We currently have a situation of haves and have-nots of services. Lower Lantzville with water and sewer, and most of Upper Lantzville with no water or sewer. You have a chance to correct this imbalance with the Nanaimo Water Agreement, which has been described as one of the best in Canada. The agreement will eventually provide water for everyone, not just us. I applaud you for achieving that agreement. Let's get moving on implementing that contract and have equality of service. In my opinion, you should not be delaying the agreement by micro-amending something you haven't even tried to work with. With very low interest rates, you have a golden opportunity to own and manage your own water distribution system. Make a 20-year plan supplying water to all of Lantzville. Do not rely on developers who have proven to be unreliable in the past. Let's invest in Lantzville's future and move it forward into becoming a vibrant, progressive, developing community. I have 8 questions, but I probably don't have time for them all here now. My first question is, are you contemplating removing the red circled Winds neighborhood map from the Nanaimo Water Agreement?
Mr. McCrae, do you want to answer the question again with respect to the water agreement and the map?
Sure, I'm just going to look over to Coors as well for a comment on that, perhaps in regards to the red square. I'll just speak to the legal agreement as I get blinded by the projector. Again, the legal agreement does not refer anywhere to the Winds. The legal agreement refers to Upper Lantzville, Lower Lantzville. If it was really proper, in my legal opinion on this, it would say upper pressure zone, lower pressure zone. So the Winds, again, as I've alluded to before, is a bit of a misnomer. It doesn't really exist. It's a slang terminology. So the red piece there, maybe you can speak to Rob in regards to what the red means. Or Frank, go ahead. Yes. You might as well come on down.
It's going to be short and sweet. Basically, all we know about the red area was to supply the map that had a red area on it. Whereas we weren't involved in any of the negotiations or anything. We're not really privy to what was discussed. So we don't really have a lot of background.
We're not against water for everyone equally. We don't want to be red circled as the only ones. Obviously, there's a need all over the community. We certainly did that by our petition, and almost 100% of people want water in our neighborhood at the right reasonable cost, and that's where we're at now. I think somebody's already answered the timeline. We're going to get water, unanswered, of course. What is the current water account budget? Does it have the $1.2 million to pay Nanaimo in it?
That's one of those questions I will unfortunately have to get back to you with. Our current director of finance is actually at the GFOA. So what I will do is I will take your... We have created a new Facebook page and a new Twitter page as of today. One of the things that I will be doing with some of these questions that do not get fulfilled tonight is I will put the questions on Facebook and on Twitter, and I will also answer them on Facebook and Twitter as well. So that way they're online. We will put them on our webpage as well. So we will try and amalgamate some of that. But to give you the quick answer, unfortunately, I can't answer that this evening.
Is the water account a separate account?
Within the district itself, there's a variety of I use the term buckets, of monies that have been raised or contributed by, in some cases, the district as a whole. So, for example, in relation to general surpluses, some of the buckets of money were contributed by the existing water users, so those 885 connections have been contributing through the years. Some of the monies have come from the provincial and federal government in terms of gas tax money that's set aside for the potential of projects like this. If the question was, does the district have $2 million, for example, in the bank to pay for something like that? I would say yes. I mean, our current cash reserves, based on a comment from staff, recognizing that some of them are reserved for very specific purposes, is about $5 million. Just a couple of two quick comments with regards to some of your numbers. So, for example, you came up with a number of 4,000 and change. The buy-in to the city of Nanaimo for each individual connection is 5,912. And so that number may have been a calculation based on the 3.8 million that Coors came up with for that distribution system. That number did not include the 5,912. It does not include the cost for a resident from connecting to the street to their house, and that's going to fluctuate from property to property. So those become some additions to that number. Last comment, I hear what you're saying about you want it to be as affordable as possible. And certainly the 7 people that are tasked with this, that's our goal as well. Our goal is to make it as affordable as possible, because if we go to a local area service, we go to it because we want it to pass. We don't want it to fail. When it comes to the challenge of the money, if it's $36,000, for example, in hard costs, let's ignore the plus or minus 40% for a second. That $36,000 has to come from somewhere. And so, for example, the existing money within the district, as I mentioned, there's 885 water users who have been contributing for decades that have built up some funds. There's some funds that have been contributed by the sewer users over the past while. That's part of that $5 million of the district. And so one of the decisions on the part of council is to try and figure out, within this pie that we have now, and possible other slices to the pie that may come from developers or may come from grants, to make it affordable for you. Because that's the only way that it's going to be successful. I do not want to have a case where we say, okay, people up in the winds, let's go to a local service area vote where it's not going to pass. Because if that happens, Natasha doesn't get water. And I don't mean to make it personal, but certainly you've been the spokesperson and the person that pushes council for this. That's our goal. There's no other goal other than water to all existing residents that need it, and then who desire it. Well, the timely manner part, I admit, it's a bit of a challenge. And it's a case of getting those ducks in a row such that we can go to the point where we can approach those residents and say, based on everything we have to date, this is the number, agree or not, and the minute it's agreed, there we go. They start doing that plan on digging that pipe.
Well, I say get on with that 20-year plan, that master plan, and phase it in, and everybody should be having water here within the next 20 years.
Priorities.
is a must. Natasha's case is a prime example. It can't come soon enough for people like her.
And I hear you. And you know, when it comes to council here, that's exactly what council's been saying.
You mentioned the connection charge Nanaimo is going to charge. We have to, if we get Nanaimo water.
Actually, if we can listen to his question, please.
If we are put on the Nanaimo source water, the connection charge will be approximately $6,000. I didn't include that because I wasn't sure how that all worked. So if you were in Lower Landsville and you're hooked into the well field water, source water, and you have a connection fee there of around $4,000, how is that going to relate to the overall, whether you're on Nanaimo source water or whether you're on, are you going to pay both connection fees or only one, and which one will you pay?
The actual determination of how the financial side will integrate between the upper versus the lower has not been determined. When it comes to the existing people, we haven't had a new connection for a long time. When it comes to the costing, there is a cost for an individual. For example, let's say the Roslyn area in Lower Landsville. Let's say they were to connect to the Lower Landsville area. There would be infrastructure that need to be built, pipes that need to be built in order to integrate that in. In addition, when it comes to the Nanaimo water agreement, the expectation is that a connection fee would also be paid there as well. So there are some definite planning aspects that need to be done with regards to how the system and how the charges would be integrated and who in the end would pay and how much. And most definitely, it's still work to be done.
I'll take up any more time. One more question to Mr. Hoffman, because he's the resident expert on aquifers, I guess. And I live in aquifer quadrant 215, if I'm correct here. So can he give me an overall picture of where that aquifer is? Is it adequate? Is it replacing itself? And also, does that aquifer originate from Quadra Island, or what is that? How did that name originate?
Blame the Spaniards.
So just a matter of disclosure, I'm not a hydrogeologist. Dennis Lohan, who was hired by the district to do the groundwater study, he sort of authored the report, sort of defining the aquifer and characterizing the capacity. But you know, in working with him, we pick up a little bit of the terminology and some of the background. So your question about the Quadra, I think that relates to the Quadra sands, which is a deposit of sand that was sort of laid down during the Ice Age and a certain geological composition to it. So I think that's the name of it. As for the specifics of Aquifer 215, I'd have to look into that. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Just another written one. I'm concerned about our trend towards drought. Does the master plan take this into account with the reduction of 3,400 liters per property down to 2,900? First off, the number of the 3,400 to 2,900 came out of a report that was done by Coors Engineering. Within that, as part of the process, it also did mention in there, recommend in there, the monitoring of climate change and the climate conditions and the drought conditions as part of the process with regards to consideration of that reduction of standards. So yes, that report did raise that concern.
I have some pretty neat neighbors, and they sometimes have information or make comments that lead me to think about what's going on. And one of them was that there's a 1 million liter water tower behind Northwind at the top of the hill. And I have no idea if there's any truth to it, but at one point they said that possibly the First Nations may consider supplying water to the Northwinds because it's convenient. And has anyone ever looked into that? Is there any truth to it, or is it even possible?
Okay, in terms of that water tank, yes, it's on the Snunnawas Reserve. It was built by the Snunnawas for their purposes. Full disclosure, I did send a letter early 2014 roughly, to the band council at that time with regards to consideration of whether or not they would allow for connection. It went to their band council. At the time, we were involved in an election, so they did not reply. Subsequent to that, there was the signing of the agreement with the city of Nanaimo, and they've also had, let's call it, leadership changes there as well. So it's certainly something that we can request or revisit again. There's also been questions raised by the residents on Northwind, Southwind, recognizing that we provide fire protection from the News First Nation, as to whether or not there'd be consideration of access to those hydrants as well. But there's been nothing formal either come from them to date or come from this or go to this from this council to their council list for a request.
Would it be possible to follow up on that?
Most definitely. Yep.
It's not pressurized, is it, Colin? It's just gravity feed, isn't it? And that might located at the top.
Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Spears, any idea?
Yes, it's a gravity reservoir, so I mean the water's sitting in a standpipe and it's filling the water pipe, so any of the water in the pipe is pressurized. So as the further you go downhill, the higher the pressure becomes.
So even if there were a fire and they said you can use that tank, it would be running out pretty slowly.
It depends on where you'd be drawing the water from. The further downhill from the tank, the greater the pressure.
Thank you. Graham Savage, 6685 Harwood Drive. I want to speak to both the Nanaimo Water Agreement and the well field and the lower pressure zone. So comments were made earlier that the water agreement infers that it's only for developers. I'd like to clarify something. So this is a numbers game. Currently the well field services 800 and something connections. Let's say 900. The Nanaimo Water Agreement says that the Nanaimo Water will be supplied to 225 of those connections. So I do the math and I go 900 minus 225. That seems to me that 225 in the Winchelsea area that is currently being supplied by the well field will be surplus and could be utilized in the low pressure zone. If we add that 225 number, 225 connections, the volume of water for those 225, plus the increased yield for the well field, then by default, the Nanaimo Water Agreement for 1.2 or 1.3 million, plus the 700,000 connection, $2 million. So for $2 million, it frees up possibly 400 connections in the lower Lanceville area. So unless I'm missing something, that water agreement for 1.2 million plus the connection, yes, it does speak to developers, but by default, the lower Lanceville area, the existing village, will benefit from more water capacity in the existing well field. So from my perspective, the sooner we get on and pay the Nanaimo $1.2 million, the better this community will be. Thank you.
Just with respect to the math, based on our existing standards and the capacity or projected capacity of the well field itself, based on that standard of 3,400 liters per day, we should not have currently connected 885 connections. We should only, based on our standards, have connected approximately, and I'm going off the top of my head here, roughly about 710. So in terms of the capacity, it's over-connected currently. So when it comes to that release, let's call it, of those 225 water connections, that unto itself initially, based on current standards, deals with the backlog effectively of those connections. As for additional water out of the well field, that's why this council has tasked staff with the redevelopment of well 6, the re-drilling of well 6 and the redevelopment of the other 3 wells, so that we can determine whether or not there is additional capacity. Because the worst thing to do would be to connect somebody and then later on say, oops, sorry, it's not there. And so that's why council has taken the steps it has with regards to the well redevelopment and the well redrilling.
I may have missed it somewhere along the way, but where does the foothills fit into all of this? I understood that they were supposed to be developing a huge reservoir to help supply part of Nanaimo. Could somebody please speak to where the foothills is in this whole fixture? Do they have the water supply? And was there not to be a huge reservoir up there, which Lanceville could also, the rest of Lanceville, their part of Lanceville, could tap into?
Okay, originally you said supply Nanaimo, so you had me a little confused.
Okay. Long day.
With respect to dealings with foothills, I'll turn it over to the planner.
Yeah, so with respect to the, can everybody hear me back then? So with respect to the foothills, they've made application for phase 1A of the development, which is approximately 30 plus lots. They do have a well on site, and it has capacity to provide for up to, I think it's 120 parcels at this point in time. Certainly that's not enough to provide the overall development, and we're working with them through that program. But as part of the overall design, they are required to put reservoirs on their site to service their development. We're also discussing with them the requirements for tying into the existing water system. So those discussions are currently happening, and the application is active at this point in time.
So there's no discussion in this about a larger reservoir if they come up with water and then back supplying the rest of Lanceville?
The key part there was if they come up with the water. As a developer with the wells on their property, they effectively get first right to that water because it's on private land as opposed to a public well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Is there a government office or entity or minister that we ought to be writing letters to about water quality, or would that be like in trying to get grants? Should there be a flurry from citizens directed to someone?
Well, without the background information, for example, of that water master plan, they're going to be going effectively, what are you talking about? But once that itself is in place, as I said, the aspect of lobbying, for example, MLA Michelle Stilwell is an important part of that process. And certainly with regards to the approval of Phase 1 of sewer, that was a thing that really swayed it and made them understand what our challenges were.
And yet this lady, I'm sorry, I forgot her name, Natasha, said that the government is aware of boron problems. So have you spoken to them? Yes. Okay, so they are already aware.
Yeah.
Without a survey.
Well, one of the things to remember about government is there's different ministries within the government. And so, for example, if you make the health department aware of something, it doesn't make the grant people aware of something. And the criteria that they use is different from ministry to ministry on, number one, what their powers are, and number two, what activities they get involved in. So as an example, somebody like health, let's say they say, you guys got to do this. They don't tell you how you're going to pay for it. And so when it comes to the aspect of say, a ministerial order to do something, effectively it leaves the community with no option but to do it. And trying to get grants in time is dependent upon funding, as opposed to the residents themselves paying for it.
So individual pressure on Michelle Stilwell would go nowhere. It should come from council.
Well, I wouldn't say that. It's a question of timing, though, in that regard. Because effectively what they're going to do is they would come back and they would say, okay, let's say we're considering it. Where's your plan? Is what they'd be looking for, which is what that plan over that next 6 months, or once it begins is roughly 6 months. It's meant to provide the background so when it becomes a case that we do have the information, then certainly the individual pressures, letters, etc. That's the time to do it.
Yeah. I wanted to know, is there anything in the Nanaimo Water Agreement that would preclude us from connecting those 500 remaining lots that don't have a connection, and then connecting to the Nanaimo water system?
want to repeat that?
The reason I asked that, I would save $3 million. $3 million that we would use in our own infrastructure needs. That's 500 times the $5,900 connection fee.
So are you basically saying connect the people in Upper Lanceville?
I say connect everybody.
Oh, well,
Connect
okay.
everybody, and then the next day, go to Nanaimo and say, okay, we want to take you up on your offer.
It's all about timing.
The fact that you're laughing and having that awkward pause tells me how bad that agreement was written. It's inconceivable that a good lawyer and a good engineer got together and wrote that agreement.
Well, okay, I'll use myself. When I enter into an agreement, when I act on an agreement, I do it with the intent of upholding that agreement. Because if you don't, you end up being sued. So for example, people have suggested, well, why don't we connect up to Nanaimo and then, kind of what you're suggesting, just not on that scale, violate the agreement? Well, in respect of the agreement itself, it does have provisions. Basically, if you violate it, you're in trouble. Now, would they shut it off?
So you're
they're going to notice us connecting 500 houses.
That by pre-connecting, that's a violation of the agreement.
Well, you're saying pre-connect to the Nanaimo system. That is not a violation of the agreement.
Okay.
Whether or not they turn the valve on that pipe is going to be dependent upon whether or not we are in compliance with it. And I can suggest to you that the provincial government, if it comes to looking for grants, determines that you're doing it in anticipation of violating an agreement with a neighboring jurisdiction, they're not going to look too kindly on your application.
So again, you're saying that if we build out those 500 lots, that's a violation of the agreement as it is currently written.
No, building up those lots and then attempting to connect would be where the violation would come in.
So that's written in the agreement like that.
Not specifically like that, because they're not thinking like you. That's outside the box.
I've been involved in many written agreements, and when you write an agreement, and it's written by lawyers, obviously, and everyone's vetted it, if it isn't specifically written in the agreement, then it isn't so.
Got a point.
And I'll certainly defer to counsel up here on the table.
Well,
but
okay,
and
I realize we're getting into
has read the agreement back and forwards many a time. So, again, is there anything that specifically precludes Lanceville from connecting all 500 remaining lots and then going to Nanaimo and say, we're ready to take you up on your offer?
Thank God Larry McNabb's not on the Nanaimo.
Clarifying discussion. The fact of the matter is, Lance, that you can get everything set up, but the second you turn on the valve and we haven't signed the agreement, we're basically violating that agreement. We're operating in bad faith. It's not the intent of the agreement to do the last piece of the puzzle that you're proposing. So you can build everything up, get everything ready, but the second you flip that switch on, we have now violated because we have not signed that, yes, we're going to connect, let's move forward, we owe you some money. So that's that process. It's that final little piece that is going to get us into litigation based on that. Now, it may be at the four corners of the page test, and there'll be some unknowns. Which you want to play legal? We'll play legal. I'm just saying, if it's not explicitly said in there, well, then guess what happens? They lawyer up, we have to lawyer up, and now we're in an argument over an agreement that we haven't even hooked up with. The point of this is to move forward with the agreement, move forward with the recommendations that have been made by the Nanaimo Council to make this, and I'm not talking legalities, I'm talking this on an equitable scale, to make those adjustments. It's legality aside.
And if I might just kind of expand, the concerns expressed tonight, a lot of them revolve strictly around cost. If there's supply, can I afford the pipe? What you're proposing is put out the money for those pipes without the supply. That still leaves us with that cost challenge. And when we go for a grant and we say we're going to put in a pipe, but we're not sure where the supply is going to come from or something like that, we're not getting the grant.
If you're relying on grants rather than the development. But anyway,
Well,
I think my point was made. The fact that you hesitated on it, and there was a groan, means you got some weakness. You've got some weakness written into that agreement. And you need to ask yourself, why wouldn't we save $3 million and put it to our own infrastructure and then go seek out?
I wouldn't necessarily argue that on that point anyways, that there are weaknesses within the agreement. The pause had more to do with, wow, would we really do that?
Fair enough.
That deals with the written questions that I have related to water. There is a sewer-related question here regarding preliminary sewer, or the sewer Phase 3. Could we advise what area Phase 3 will cover? In general terms, Phase 3 of the sewer covers the area of Lower Lanceville that was not incorporated in the final Phase 2, as well as the Winchelsea area. If you need a more detailed explanation, there are maps of the district or on the website for Phase 3, such that you can identify your individual street as to whether or not you're in or out of Phase 3.
I've got to ask this, it's a right turn. Last week, I watched millions of gallons go down my mountainside. And, you know, we're crying for water. Is catchment and purification so much more costly than, you know, giving millions of dollars or you know, $1 million to Nanaimo? Is that out of the question? I was talking to someone earlier. I sailed by Gibraltar. Long time ago, a whole side of Gibraltar was covered with, I guess it was concrete, but that was the water catchment, you know, for that island. Is this impossible, you know, not feasible cost-wise for that stuff? We have a lot of water that falls, say, 8 months a year. It all goes down to the ocean. We aren't using it. You know, is that so far out to think we could catch that and possibly purify it? Even on an individual basis, subsidizing purification, you know, on the individual just to buy time and just solve some problems. I don't know, I submit that. Thank you.
Staff like to comment on the cost of storage on that kind of a scale?
Yeah, the problem with, you know, I'll start off with the problems. I mean, it's a great idea, great concept. One of the issues with capturing surface water is treatment. In order to provide surface water to residents for potable water, it needs to be treated, and treatment has to be through filtration. So even a small treatment plant would run into the range of between $5 and $10 million. So that's just the treatment plant alone. Then you're looking at trying to build storage, which on average is about roughly about $3 a gallon, or $3 a gallon, something of that nature. So the cost would be far greater to implement something of that nature than it would to run the pipes and service the properties from that level.
Okay, any additional questions?
I just have one comment.
Hang on. Well, Mr. Erickson.
Sorry.
I had an interesting time reading the information sheet that came out last week. And it troubles me a little bit that there's a number of assumptions made that have been based on decisions in the past that haven't been really clearly worked out in that document. One of the assumptions is that we want to have a centralized pumping station in the well. Nothing else will do. We'll all hook that in and that'll supply the whole district. And this concept about, do we have some water somewhere up in the hill behind the winds, is a good one that I don't see addressed in the reports that I was reading a couple of years ago. And I think that what I'd like to suggest is that you would be amenable to adding some more details to the water management plan that we have here. This question this lady had about water quality is a good example And you said, oh no, it's somebody else's responsibility. And I would say to you as a resident of Lanceville, no, this is important to us, and we think that there's a role for Lanceville to take in knowing what our water quality is, and then this is an appropriate forum, the management plan, to actually address what our water quality is and the issues associated with that. And that isn't just because of boron and wells, it's also because of water quality in our streams and our lakes and whatnot. Another issue that I'd like to see addressed in that management plan is this whole issue about firefighting. It seems to me, not being a fireman, that to pour drinking water quality water on the fires is a waste of drinking water. And I think that we should take a look at another way of being able to supply some of that water. It doesn't have to be all of it. We can still have hydrants for initial hit on the fire and whatnot. But we should take a look at maybe it's economical to buy a couple more tanker trucks and supply a fighting force with water from tankers at a more reasonable cost than what it is to have our ordinary drinking water used for that. So would you be willing to add some of those ideas to your water management plan?
I'm just going to say, I'll donate my boron water to the fire department. If you want water, they can have mine. It's great for fighting fires. Like so.
Okay, with regards to the feasibility of the fire side, unfortunately our fire chief who was here earlier is, I don't believe, here now. He got called out. So that's a question that I would defer to him. So staff will get you a response with respect to that. With the idea of looking at other potential sources, say the winds and that sort of an aspect, or a decentralized system, as you suggested, it isn't contemplated in the existing RFP. So it would require an addendum or amendment to the RFP in order to expand it to that sort of a level. Just kind of historically, there have, for example, been wells drilled, as was mentioned previously, in the west end of Southwind. We also did some well drilling years ago up above Siwash Ridge that didn't appear to be fruitful in that respect. When you go to the decentralized system, then you also have additional reservoir concerns and those sorts of things in order to get that ongoing supply. But as it's contemplated right now in the RFP, that sort of a task isn't included within it. Council could, if they chose, make a motion to amend and add it to it, but I can't pre-guess what Council would want to do in that regard.
Hi, my name is Mary David. I've lived in Lanceville for 42 years, but I know water's always been a problem. But I wasn't aware that the winds had the problem that they have. Now, as a young girl, I lived in Europe in a lot of places where they had a pump in the middle of a town. Has anybody ever thought if the water's that bad in the winds to supply something with good water for drinking or something? I wasn't aware that the water was that bad. I mean, this is going back sort of instead of forward, but has anybody ever thought of putting a pump somewhere for good water? I mean, if their problem is that bad.
I admit that sort of conversation itself that I'm aware of has never been done in Lanceville.
I mean, if you've traveled in Europe, they've always got a pump, and I'm sure those cities are antiquated. They must have terrible water, and there was always fresh water in the town center or somewhere where you could actually get drinking water that was good.
Like I said, it hasn't been contemplated at any time that I've ever heard of.
I just thought it was interesting.
And some people would argue with respect to water being carried in some way, shape, or form. Like, for example, my understanding is there are individuals in the winds who do bring in water in the summer. Right, so they do purchase water and have a cistern of some sort in order to do that provision.
It was a good idea.
Just one quick question. Is the access to the Aerosmith water source, is that dead? Could that be resurrected?
The ability to join in at this point, dead's kind of a strong word, but I would argue yes. And on top of that, people are worried about the cost of the initial connection, for example, with Nanaimo. The cost of running the pipe for the Aerosmith system and tying in, ignoring any sort of buy-in in that, was quite substantial years ago when it was looked at, and as was mentioned before, the vote in '95 roughly, it was, I'm going off the top of my head here, $8 to $9 million at that time, just for that connection.
Just a comment on the agreement with Nanaimo. There's an intent, a legal intent to the agreement. Don't lose your moral compass when you're dealing with them, because you'll be in big trouble if you get caught playing games. So keep your cards above the table, and we might make a deal with Nanaimo yet. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further? Well, again, thank you very much for coming out. By all means, if you have additional questions or concerns, any member of council can certainly work at getting you the answers, as can staff. As was mentioned by Mr. McCray, there's now a Twitter account, there's a Facebook account, certainly there's emails, there's always the district office. When it comes to those questions, certainly keep them coming. Thank you very much.